Okay, so we're going to look at the first part of chapter 24. And this chapter is called Reactionary 20s because there's a lot of knee jerk reactions to things that are going on in the 20s. So first, we're going to take a look at immigration. There's another surge of immigration after World War I, mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe. So this leaves many Americans very alarmed due to their political beliefs. So U.S. citizens feared an invasion of foreigners, and this is going to lead Congress to pass a couple of immigration laws. The first one is the Immigration Act of 1921, which limited the total number of immigrants. So 3 years later, we still have the United States still has a large influx of Southern and Eastern Europeans coming in. So they're going to pass another immigration law, the Immigration Act of 1924, which is going to set quotas. And these quotas are going to be based on the population of ethnic groups in the 1890 census. So this was before you had a large influx of Southern and Eastern Europeans coming over. So, the purpose of this was to favor certain immigrant groups over others. For instance, they're going to favor immigrants from Northern and Western Europe. And this is going to reduce the number of Jews, Italians, Russians, and Poles that are coming. Now, the immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe are going to be treated as enemies, despite the fact that they're benefiting the country by working in some of these very hard manual labor jobs. In fact, President Coolidge in the 20s stated that America must be kept for America. And so he's going to be the one that's going to sign the Immigration Act of 1924. And this remains good law. So we have this quota system until 1965, where we're limiting these groups. Now, you got to remember what's going on in the 30s when you had the genocide of Jews. And the United States Congress is not going to change these quotas and allow Jews to come in to escape persecution and death from the Holocaust. And that's a very sad tragedy because we're going to see how the Jews are targeted in the 20s as well. The irony of the Immigration Act of 1924 is it placed no quotas on immigrants from countries in the Western Hemisphere, such as Mexico or, Latin American countries. And the reason for this is because you have these large commercial farms, and they created a lobby group, and they're going to Congress, and they want these immigrants to come in, and they want this adequate supply of labor coming in from Mexico. So the unexpected result of this is we're going to see the rate of immigrants from Latin America is going to become the largest growing ethnic minority in the 1920s. So farm owners basically preferred immigrants from Latin America over Black or poor whites, these sharecroppers or tenant farmers. So that's kind of the irony of this whole immigration. And what's the issue today? A lot of people don't want these Latin American immigrants coming into the United States. And, we got to go back and look at our history of immigration in order to reform current immigration laws. Now, this trial of Sacco and Vanzetti, go on to the next slide, is this trial is very important because it's going to reveal the connection between European immigrants and their radical beliefs. And this is going to be exposed in this criminal case of Sacco and Vanzetti. So Sacco and Vanzetti are two Italian immigrants that are charged with murder and robbery. These two immigrants, they had identified themselves as anarchists, and so they're arrested outside of Boston, accused of robbery and murder. Now, there's witnesses that identify them as the two men that robbed and murdered the store and got away with $16,000. But however, when these two men are arrested, they never found the money. The money was not on them at the time of their arrest. And in fact, several people will testify and tell the police at the time of their arrest that they were with them at the time that this crime was committed. So they were nowhere near the scene of the crime. So needless to say, the evidence against these two men were very sketchy in the beginning. And a lot of people thought that Sacco and Vanzetti was not put on trial for murder and burglary. They were put on trial for their political beliefs. And so there's a worldwide protest against the arrest and persecution of these two Italians. So they're arrested in 1921 and they file appeal after appeal after appeal, but they lose and they end up being electrocuted in 1927. And still today, there's a lot of controversies surrounding the arrest and execution of these two Italians. Now let's look at the rise of the KKK. So we're going to see the Ku Klux Klan is going to have a resurgence in the 1920s. So we saw the Klan emerge during Reconstruction, and it was persecution of African Americans, and it was in the South. It was located in the South. Now we're going to see a resurgence of the Klan promoting white supremacy, 100% Americanism. And a lot of this is due to the backlash of immigrants as well. So at the height of this organization, we're going to see 4 million members. And this isn't in the South. This is widespread. This is in the Northwest. It's in the Northeast. It's in the Midwest. It's in the Southwest. One of the reasons why we have this organization emerge again is it kind of go alongside this movie, Birth of a Nation, that was released in 1915. And so we see the resurgence of the Klan at this very same date. And this film glorified the Klan. And unfortunately, the movie becomes very popular. In fact, there's a showing of this movie in the White House when Wilson is president in 1915. So this movie attempts to rewrite Southern history and make Klansmen, they're seen as heroes, and former slaves are basically seen as working with these corrupt governments that's set up by the North, with carpetbaggers and scalawags and things like this. So African Americans are not portrayed very well. They're seen as traitors, basically. So this Klan, and one of the things, in the 20s, we have all this slick advertising. Well, the Klan is going to use this advertising to promote membership. They also will sponsor baseball games. They will help support college fraternities to garner new members. And of course, you see this poster here. This is at the State Fair of Dallas. Meet your friends. It's Ku Klux Klan Day, and Wednesday, October the 24th. So the public is invited to come out. Look, they're having a band, they're having fireworks and all this to come out and attract people. And I mean, this is the kind of things that went on during this time period. And the Klan becomes very popular. But here's the deal with the Klan during this time period. This is in backlash, basically in response to the immigrants that are coming over. They're going to preach hatred against African Americans, Catholics, Jews, immigrants, communists, prostitutes, adulterers. So they're going to enact what we call these blanket assaults against these various groups of people. So by region, in the Southwest, Mexicans and immigrants from Latin America are going to become targets. In the Pacific Northwest, it's going to be the Japanese that are going to be the targets. In the Northeast, in the New York area, it's going to be Jews and Catholics. And then, of course, in the Midwest, this is where you have a lot of your old stock Americans, Protestant Anglo-Saxons. And so they're going to be attacking the immorality in America. And what is so amazing about the membership of the Klan during this time period, it's not just, it is all levels of the socioeconomic ladder, doctors, lawyers, farmers, everyone is impacted by the Klan, all levels of society. And here's something that's very ironic. The only president that really spoke out against the Klan is going to be Calvin Coolidge. In fact, he's going to try to promote civil rights idea. He promoted anti-lynching. But other than that, Hoover, Wilson, of course, Harding, they don't speak out against the Klan and the activities of the Klan. In fact, one congressman says you can pay $10 to hate somebody by joining the Klan, and they were determined to get their money's worth. So that tells you, this very reactionary movement. The Klan is very popular in the rural areas in the Midwest. And in fact, in Indiana, the Klan takes over state government, takes over city government. And when the Grand Wizard is arrested and charged with kidnap, rape, and mutilating a 28-year-old Klan staff member, we start to see the collapse of the Klan. And what happens is he thinks the governor, because the governor is a Klan member, that he's going to get a pardon. And when he doesn't get a pardon, he turns the table and exposes all the corruption and bribery that was going on in the state of Indiana. So as a result, the governor is forced to resign. Several congressmen are forced to resign. And of course, local leaders, sheriffs, and things like this are forced to resign. So we see the decline of the Klan in the 20s. And we're not really going to see a resurgence of the Klan until the 1950s when we have the civil rights movement, but it's going to look a little bit different. And here is a picture of a march, and you see the nation's capital in the background. 100,000 Klansmen show up in D.C. for this march, and they're not covering their faces. They're proud of who they are. They're proud of promoting 100% Americanism. And, if you look at today's society, we see this white supremacy emerging again today. America First has been kind of the buzzword, which we'll talk a lot about that when we come back from break regarding the 1930s. Now, we also at the same time see this rise of fundamentalism in the country. Fundamentalist Christians are going to view science and evolution as a threat to religion. So a lot of the conservative Protestants are going to embrace what is known as militant fundamentalism. And because a lot of it is because of the hostility of the liberal beliefs. And so what is going to result is kind of like a religious civil war. You're going to have some denominations of Christianity is going to embrace science and see how science and religion can merge and be taught. But then you have these extreme fundamentalists, the Christian fundamentalists, that basically does not agree with this. And so, they're opposed to modernism in this mainstream Protestantism. And so, they're, where you have some Protestants are going to embrace the teaching of evolution and others will not. What happens is you're going to have many state laws that have a large population of fundamentalist Christians that have embraced this militant idea. They're going to be passing laws banning the teaching of evolution in public schools. And so the Scopes trial is kind of is a reaction to these laws being passed. So the Scopes trial is one of these 10 days that changed America. And this is something that's still debated today about prayer in schools, and there is this idea of, there was some backlash about evolution being taught in schools today. So the Scope Trials is going to reveal these tensions between modernism and fundamentalism, between rural and urban, because mostly it's your rural farmers in the Midwest, that this is old stock Christians that believe the Bible word for word, and they do not believe in the idea of evolution and some of the science that challenges some of the stories in the Bible. So this trial really symbolized the old order in America and the rise of modernism, but it's also urban versus rural as well. Now we're going to look at prohibition. So we see the 18th Amendment is bans the sale and manufacture of alcohol. And there's a lot of loopholes in this law. One of the loopholes is it's not illegal to drink. It's illegal to manufacture and sell alcohol. So when the amendment is passed, a lot of breweries and wineries are going to stockpile their liquor, and they will continue selling it, and people will continue drinking. But the 18th Amendment was when you had religion and progressives basically are going to join forces to get the amendment passed. Religious leaders wanted to ban alcohol because they're opposed to drinking because of sin. And progressives were convinced that drinking led to a lot of other problems, such as domestic violence, prostitution, and workplace accidents. But the Great War, World War I, is also going to signify an opportunity to get the 18th Amendment passed. You need to save the grain for the war effort. And of course, another driving force for the 18th Amendment is nativism, because most breweries were German owned. And so we see, remember during World War I, it was hate the Hun. Nothing German was sacred anymore. The music, the language. So that is going to be also an underlying reason to pass the 18th Amendment. Now, drinking is going to decline as a result of the 18th Amendment, but people who want to drink are going to find ways to drink. And of course, there's loopholes. Like some wineries were allowed to stay open and continue making wine because wine is used in religious services. And of course, farmers are allowed to can their fruit so it ferments and they make cider out of it. So, that was allowed. And of course, drinking of alcohol is legal. And so basically what happens is you're going to also, one of the downsides of the prohibition is like with any other law, like with some of the drug laws, people are going to make what we call bathtub gin. And some of it is going to be, poison, and people will die as a result of it. But while we see drinking decline over time, prohibition was seen as a colossal failure. And there's many reasons for this. One is the rise of organized crime, because you have bootleggers. These gangsters emerge, and they're going to have their territories, and they have gang wars, basically, and a lot of people are killed in the process. And really, the 18th Amendment made citizens who are drinking, they're openly skirting the law. They're going to these speakeasies. In fact, in New York City, before Prohibition, there were about 15,000 saloons. During Prohibition, there's 32,000 saloons, these secret nightclubs, the speakeasies. So people are finding a way around it. Civil liberties are going to be violated, and of course, police powers are going to be expanded because they're going to be going after the criminals, the gangsters during this time period. But one side effect I don't think the government realized is the loss of tax revenue. So there's a considerable decline in the revenue coming in for the federal government because there's a federal tax on liquor. But the overall aspect of the 18th Amendment is we see bootlegging and the expansion of bars. This is going to be norm for the big cities during this time period. People don't, majority of Americans don't stop drinking in the cities. Now, of course, in the urban areas, that's your old stock Protestant who don't drink. And so and this kind of is part of this conflict between rural and urban. People in the cities are sinners. They drink. And of course, women, we talked about the flappers. They go, here's a picture of women at a speakeasy. They're wearing short skirts, they're drinking, they're smoking, and, a lot of other undesirable activity is going on. Now we're going to look at the politics, and we're only going to look at a couple of items. And then Wednesday, we're going to be looking at the policies of Coolidge and Hoover and of course the causes of the Great Depression, but their conservative policies are going to basically lead to problems. So when Harding is running for office in 1920, understand President Harding, his campaign slogan is return to normalcy. People, it's kind of like today. We want to return to normal. We want something normal back in our life, because of the pandemic. Well, as a result of the war and, soldiers coming back, and there's a lot of conflict, Americans want to return to normal. They don't want, they were taught to conserve, and there wasn't a lot of consumer goods available. So they want to go back to normal. But Harding, his campaign slogan, return to normalcy, really reflected his limited abilities. The public is going to pledge abstinence. Publicly, he's going to pledge abstinence, but privately, he drank in the White House. He held poker games. He skirted the law. He had numerous affairs. He fathered children outside of marriage. He was an adulterer. He is one of these people that were immoral, and he is president of the United States. Now, he is going to appoint some very conservative judges to the Supreme Court, and there have very the court has a very devastating impact on a lot of the progressive legislation that was passed. So they're going to walk back many of these progressive reforms. They struck down the federal child labor law, the Keep Knowing Act. The court's going to strike it down. Numerous injunctions are filed against striking unions that the court is going to uphold. And they're going to really limit the power of the federal government that regulated businesses. So basically, it's back to the Gilded Age, laissez-faire during this time period. And and we're going to see also the diminishing power of the presidency and the more influence of Congress during this time period. Now, remember when there was this loss of revenue from the liquor? Congress is also going to lower income taxes. In fact, by 1921, only 2% of the workers were actually paying an income tax. Tax levels were so low. So you have this loss of revenue. So how's the government going to get it back? Well, they're going to raise tariffs, which again is going to harm a lot of businesses. And we're going to look at that as being one of the causes of the Great Depression. Now, farmers were okay with tariffs as long as they put tariffs on agricultural products coming into the country and competing with American farmers. And they don't realize that, they need to export their excess crops. Now, Harding's presidency is also plagued with numerous scandals. The most notable one is the Teapot Dome scandal. Now, Albert Fall is the Secretary of Interior. He has a tremendous amount of debt, and he needs to pay off his debt. So what he's going to be doing is he is going to sell these oil fields or privileges to the oil fields in Wyoming at Teapot Dome to these oil company executives, and this is going to help pay down his debt. Albert Fall is going to be one of the first cabinet officials in U.S. history to be sent to prison. He is sentenced to prison for 1 year. This is pretty extraordinary to happen. And of course, we see this, down the road in modern times as well. But this is just one of the many scandals in Harding's presidency. In fact, the gentleman who was over the Veteran Affairs, he met him on a plane and he said, "Hey, I'm looking for cabinet members. You want to be over the Veteran Affairs?" And the guy said, "Yeah." Well, ended up the guy never served in the war. In fact, he's a deserter. But that didn't matter. And of course, he's going to scrape money off the top that was supposed to go to veterans as well. Now let's take a look at foreign policy in the 1920s. The buzzword is isolationism. After the U.S. was involved in World War I, of course, they're going to reject the Treaty of Versailles. They're not going to join the League of Nations, but they insisted that Europeans pay back all these loans because the United States in the beginning of the war, they were the banker, and they're going to finance the war for Britain and France, most notably. But in order to get these loans paid back, Europe needed to sell their goods in the United States, but tariffs really prohibited the sale of European goods in the United States. So France and Great Britain are, calling in some other debts. Like Great Britain is saying, back during the Revolution, you didn't pay back your debts then. And, you should cancel some of this debt as a result of this. And then France is saying, remember when we come in and helped you win the revolution? And I mean, they're going way back in history to try to get some of these debts basically canceled. And then France and Great Britain said, well, you know what? We could pay our debts if Germany paid the reparations as stated in the Treaty of Versailles. So what ends up happening, and this is really bizarre, the United States is going to prop up the German economy, loan Germany money, in order so Germany can give it to Great Britain and France so they can give it to the United States. You see this circle that's created, and this is what's happening in the 30s. But everyone was kind of taken back by World War One. It was a horrible war. Gas was introduced. There was new. It was really a modern bloodbath. So what happens is Harding's Secretary of State is going to invite a lot of world leaders to DC. And basically, they're going to propose this eliminating existing warships. Because this buildup of the navies was part of the problem in causing the war, you had this militarism that was occurring. So, US, Great Britain, Japan, and France will sign what we call the Five Power Treaty, and that's limiting the size of their navy. It's the first disarmament treaty signed in world history, and they felt like this was the best way to prevent war is by limiting the size of navies. Now, so this Washington Naval Conference takes place. The next one is the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And this was proposed, again, it started in the United States. And the purpose of this agreement was to renounce war as an instrument of policy. War shouldn't be the way you resolve conflict. And of course, that was what the League of Nations was set up for. But since the United States is not part of the League of Nations, it's not very powerful. In fact, 62 nations are going to sign the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And basically what it did was outlaw war. Except for the right of self-defense. The Senate is going to ratify this agreement. But what ends up happening, if you look at this cartoon, in the 30s, you see all these invasions taking place, like Japan invades Manchuria, and vice versa. All over Europe, they're invading other countries, and of course, these invasions lead to World War II, because when Hitler invades Poland in 1939, Great Britain declares war, and then, of course, the United States is drug into the war with Pearl Harbor. So much for outlawing war. It basically didn't do what it was supposed to do during this time period. So that's the end of this lecture. And tomorrow we're going to watch 10 Days That Changed America on the